From the banks of Dewey Lake, it's the Dewey Pod Monster.
All right, welcome back. My name is John, and this is the Dewey Pod Monster podcast. With me this week, as always, is the host of the Dewey Pod Monster podcast. His name is Sean. He's the authority on Michigan craft beer, and I totally skipped over what this damn show is about. How are you doing today, Sean?
This is a podcast about consumption, your weekly podcast about consumption, as a matter of fact.
It is. So thank you for enlightening me. What have you been up to this week?
Not too much. We got together just a couple days ago and talked about some stuff, but you want to get into what we've been watching?
Yeah, let's cut into that. This topic might go a little longer than usual, it sounds like, so let's hit just some stuff that we caught up on. Do you want me to kick us off?
Yeah, why not?
All right. So I went into a couple different rabbit holes this week since the last time that we recorded. I started with a Leanna Quigley rabbit hole, which was always a good thing. So basically, I had an evening where I had a few sodas and started watching Leanna Quigley's horror workout, which in turn led to watching Sorority Babes and the Slimeball Bolorama, which is about as classic as it sounds. And then after that, it led right into another classic of Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, which is, if you haven't seen that, it's really entertaining to watch Gunnar Hansen struggle to start a chainsaw. Any of these something that you've got any opinion on, or is this just kind of...
I know a lot of the names, but I haven't seen, like, I know this Slimeball Bolorama, and I obviously know Leanna Quigley? I know you just said the name, and I'm so preoccupied right now with things that I'm getting lined up. But yeah, I mean, I obviously know her. I've seen that video, that workout video. There's a segment near the pool, right?
Yeah, it's basically just zombies doing step aerobics in front of a pool. The workout video is almost... It's one of those... It's stupid because it's only like 40 minutes long and it's an aerobic video, but it still feels like it's 10 minutes too long because so much of it is just the camera zooming in on like spandex, like 1980 spandex ass.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. And then there's these weird little like cut scenes between, because it starts with her like just laying on the floor complaining about how filthy her carpet is and arguing with her quote agent. Then she goes to the pool and does some step aerobics, and then like 5 other women show up and they're sitting around in barely anything doing aerobics, and a slasher shows up and kills all of them for some reason.
Is this part with the agent, is that actually scripted, or is it like ad-libbed, or?
I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt and say that it's ad-libbed, but it's probably scripted. It's pretty dumb. But under the right influence, it's a moderately entertaining little short video to watch, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. The Slimeball Bolorama is I'm trying to remember everything that happened. And basically, the premise of this movie is that a little like imp gets broken out of a bowling trophy, and it's kind of the idea of the like you get a wish, and the imp will grant whatever the wish is that you want, but it has bad implications in it.
Of course.
And yeah, chaos ensues from there. But the imp is kind of funny because I don't remember what year it is, but it's definitely an 80s movie, and it's very much so like somewhere between 80s claymation and 80s puppeting for what this character is, but he's kind of got a voice. The imp has a voice that's kind of somewhere between Isaac Hayes, and Isaac Hayes is probably the closest I could really like call it. It's just a little bit more crude than Isaac Hayes. So that's moderately entertaining and probably would be something that would be considered racist by today's standards. And then really of those three, Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers is the chef's kiss of that little run of movies, because the name, it lives up to the title. It's essentially a movie about a private detective who is running around trying to get to the bottom of a cult of chainsaw worshippers. And the worshippers happen to be hookers. And that's a very, very basic premise. And this movie is bad enough that it might actually deserve its own episode. So I don't know if I want to break it down too much. But it is basically that's what you get out of this movie.
I mean, Crummy Movie March is coming up. So it's a good candidate.
This is probably slightly above where I think you're planning to go for Crummy Movie March.
Oh, wow.
Not much, but like if you're talking Z, this is probably like, C or D type level. Then after I got through that little rabbit hole, I fell into a rabbit because we just got past, the Friday the 13th episode and that holiday. Well, I fell into a rabbit hole of Friday the 13th fan films, which shockingly were all kind of a lot better than I thought they were going to be. Two of them were from the same director, and I guess there's a third one coming out, but the first one's called Never Hike Alone, and the second one in that is like a little 30-minute short film called Never Hike in the Snow. And it's a little short story that's basically like one guy in relatively modern times, I'm assuming like 20 teens-ish, essentially takes a GoPro and wanders into Crystal Lake, and guess who's there? And it's basically Jason hunting this one guy, and it's only about an hour long. Obviously, like, the production quality leaves plenty to be desired. It's, you're not getting like Kane Hodder looking Jason, but for what it is, it's kind of a nice look at what you might be able to get if you let someone with a fresh idea on that franchise kind of do something a little bit different. And I can't say that, in the hour that it was on that I wasn't entertained. The second part of that, Never Hike in the Snow, it's kind of the same thing, just a half hour long, but Tom Matthews shows up. If not familiar with Tom Matthews, he's who reprised the role of Tommy Jarvis in Part 6. And for some reason, even though he's the third guy to play the character, he's usually the one that's most associated with him, maybe because he embraces the role as opposed to the other two guys. The other two that I watched, which were actually, if they could get Jason to look just a little bit better, these would almost be like interesting, kind of decent Friday the 13th movies. It's Friday the 13th Vengeance and Friday the 13th Vengeance Part 2 Bloodline. So the title's way too fucking long. But essentially what you get out of these two movies is you see Jason's father, and he's some kind of like voodoo cowboy or some shit like that, and he is brought Jason back again because that's what you do, and he's going around hunting down the Jarvis family again. And Tom Matthews shows up in the second one of these as well. I will give these movies credit, though. They're both about an hour and a half long, which I was kind of impressed that they actually made an hour and a half movie out of these. They must have had a budget, because what they spent on Caro syrup alone is more than what the first movie spent on anything. There's a pretty huge body count in these. There's, kind of all the trademarks you look for in a Friday the 13th movie. They're all there. There's campy nudity, stupid kids, Jason killing everything in sight, with everything in sight. So they're both, all four of these are available on YouTube. They're all free. They're all actually kind of worth taking a look at. Have you fallen in that rabbit hole of fan films, or is that something that you've managed to avoid?
Yeah, I haven't watched a single fan film. I was going to ask you if the gore and everything, you mentioned the Caro syrup, is it on the same level as the regular straight up movies? Is it censored for YouTube, or is there any kind of age warning or something?
They're not censored. Surprisingly, there's not an age warning, but there's no, like, this movie, the second two, the first two don't have any nudity in them, but they have a little bit of gore here and there. The second two they're on the level of gore and nudity that you would expect from a standard Friday the 13th movie, as far as how much. The gore it's like a tier down. Put it this way. Just in the movies that we've watched for this show, I've seen worse effects in movies that I've been entertained by. So they're actually decent enough. They're not on the same level as what you would get out of like a modern Hollywood blockbuster by any stretch, but they're practical effects. So you could almost make the argument that I'd rather see this than what you're going to get out of a lot of the new stuff. There's a few others that are on there that I haven't wandered into yet, but I will say those second two especially, And again, they're a far cry from a perfect movie. Like, there's plenty of things that you could pick apart if you really wanted to. But in the big picture of horror movies and the type of crap that we like to watch, you do a hell of a lot worse.
I've seen a lot of really amateur movies, and they're actually surprised. I mean, the quality of them doesn't look the greatest, but overall, you know, the gore that's in it, you can tell it's budget, right? You can tell that it's not, you know, it doesn't have some, like you said, blockbuster kind of budget, but they all have been really, you know, they might not be, some might be better than others, just as a storytelling device, of course.
Yeah.
But, you know, for the most part, they're impressive that you could, you know, do this alone. And I think with the advent of higher quality cameras and better low light capability and all that stuff, I mean,
well, better editing capabilities and what you can add in just in your home without having to get a full on studio.
Like default movie stuff that you have on like your iPad or an app that costs you $20. You know, you can do some pretty professional looking stuff.
The only other thing I really got into, I went back and started on the show Stand Against Evil. Familiar with that one?
Mm-mm.
So it's got one of the Bobs from Office Space is what the main character, and I can't remember his name now, so I should probably pull that up. But it's essentially, so I did like the Evil Dead TV show when it came out, Ash vs. the Evil Dead. But this feels a lot more like an Evil Dead TV show than what that show came off, because it's just so damn campy. The main character is John McGinley. So he's the guy from Scrubs and whatnot. He's one of those guys, I was talking about it at work today, he's one of those guys that you don't really go to a movie to see him generally, but he pops up in a movie a lot and you're like, oh, it's that guy.
Right.
But his character is almost like if you took Ash and Ron Swanson and made them a retired sheriff and smashed them together, it's kind of what you get. I'm about one season into its 3-season run, and the premise feels a little stretched out, but it's an entertaining watch thus far. What have you been watching?
You know, I've fallen down just kind of the rabbit hole of YouTube that I fall down seemingly like every night. I want to start picking up a new show or something, and I kind of forget to do that.
Friday the 13th fan
There you go.
you can two birds, one stone.
I could be doing that instead of watching random YouTube people. I watch a lot of people play games and stuff, or people that I've been following for a long time, but I've also, on the actual series front, the most recent and final episode of Hard Knocks in season for the Arizona Cardinals aired. They kind of go over the Cliff Kingsbury situation. They go over the JJ Watt is like really, he's really the focus of the episode of his retiring. What are you laughing about?
Not really much. I mean, I'm laughing because I wish they would have kept the cameras there for one more day, because I guess now Cliff Kingsbury took a one-way plane ticket to Thailand and is like declining interviews for offensive coordinator jobs and other positions in the NFL. He basically just said, all right, you're going to fire me? Peace, I'm out. And just left to Thailand.
Well, he has like years left on his contract that they're going to have to pay him for.
Yeah.
So
I think it's great.
He's living the life.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of it's situated or centered around JJ Watt, obviously his retirement and his Hall of Fame career and everything. I didn't realize he was only with the Cardinals for 3 years. Felt like much longer. He's only like 33, 5. I think. No, I don't think it was that long.
No, I thought it was like 5.
Oh, yeah. I agree. It feels like it was longer.
He's had a lot of time where he's been hurt over the last couple of years, though, which almost makes it feel like stretched out somehow.
Yeah, so I watched that. That was a good kind of final episode. But like I said, it was a lot of JJ Watt. So if you don't like JJ Watt, I would avoid it if you haven't seen it yet. And then last night,
I did like the taxidermy badger that he was carrying around that some fan sent him.
Oh, yeah.
For that one day.
Yeah.
That was kind of entertaining.
And then last night, we're recording this on Monday, the 16th, MLK Day. Last night was the kickoff, the premiere of Last of Us on HBO, which I don't know if you're familiar with Last of Us, but it's based on a PlayStation game by Naughty Dog Studios. It's basically like a zombie apocalypse, but it's a fungal infection instead of zombies. And I've heard it follows the first game really close. And so far it takes obviously a few liberties with being a television show rather than a video game. But so far it's been pretty good. And Pedro Pascal plays Joel, the main character. He's a great fit for it. I mean, I don't know if I would have thought the character Joel in the game looks a little bit more like, who played Thanos?
Josh Brolin.
Yeah. He looks a little bit more like a Josh Brolin in the game, but Pedro Pascal, I mean, he's a great actor, and he fits in really well. There's a real heart-wrenching scene, probably, I don't know, I'd say 20 minutes into the first episode. It happens really early in the first game that kind of solidifies Joel's character after this event happens in the movie, or in the game and in the show. So they really handle it really well, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of the series has to offer, and I hope that one doesn't sputter out.
I don't remember what we were talking about recently, but you had mentioned when the hype around it gets so high that you almost lose interest in something. So I didn't play the game. I'm familiar with the basic concept of it, though.
Yeah.
On the one hand, I do like Pedro Pascal quite a bit, so I'm kind of willing to give it a chance just because he's on it. Similar to like when Wednesday came out, Jenna Ortega was in it, so I gave it a chance because she was on it. On the other hand, I'm still really pissed at The Walking Dead, which was another... Okay, so I didn't realize it was a fungus. I just thought it was a zombie story.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still mad at that show, so I'm kind of... That makes me a little gun-shy about it. And the hype that it's getting less than 24 hours after it came out is not exactly making me chomping at the bit to watch it, but I might wait a little bit for it. I might wait till it's all like available at once and just kind of...
Yeah, binge through it.
It's HBO, so it's probably 10 episodes or something.
Yeah,
just kind of
8 or
hammer it
10.
out in a weekend.
I'm not burnt out on zombie TV because I stopped watching Walking Dead. I don't know. It feels like about 20 years ago. But when
I stopped when they were in the prison, which I think was season 2 or 3.
Oh,
it was
wow.
really early.
Yeah.
My wife watched it up to like season 6, I think.
And
they just ended like last year.
Yeah.
So
I want to say I watched it till like, it may have been 6 or 8 when Glenn hides under a dumpster that seems like it's tall enough for a person to fit under, which I've never seen a dumpster that's that raised off the ground. And whatever.
I gave up when Daryl slam dunked a hand grenade into the barrel of a tank. That's about when I walked away from it. I read the comics for quite a while. Like I read the comics up until, I don't remember the character's name, but he was like some king and he had like a pet tiger or some shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's right around where I fell off in the comics. But the show, I gave up really, really, like, I don't think the governor was even on the show yet when I gave up on it.
Oh, okay. So. I think it was maybe a season or two after when the governor had been on it. He became like a regular character, but that's enough with zombie TV.
All right. So in other news then, we do have a topic this week, as we usually do. I'll go ahead and lead us into this, and then I'm going to let Sean take over because he's far more versed on this than what I am. We're talking about the album that was released in 2002 by the band. Is this a band?
Electronic duo.
The electronic duo Boards of Canada. Geogaddi. Am I pronouncing that right?
That's how I would say it. I think that's how most musical scholars would pronounce it.
So Geogaddi is the second studio album by the Scottish electronic music duo Boards of Canada. It was released on February 13th of 2002 in Japan, and then 5 days later in Europe by Warp. I'm reading this off of Wikipedia.
Yeah. I'm going to get into it, John. I'm going to get into it.
All right. Go ahead. Take over.
Like you said, Boards of Canada, Scottish electronic music duo. Brothers Michael Sandison and Marcus Eoin. Before their kind of albums really came out, produced some really hard to find, if not lost, EPs. Some of the music on the EPs really only exist as snippets at this point on various websites. You can go on the Wayback Machine and find some of these clips. They might even be like real audio clips at this point. I would explain their sound in general as being analog, warm. Think of old warbly film strips or VHS tapes that you may have watched in elementary school if you're John and my age, or the old stuff, the film strips. You would have watched it up until probably the advent of DVD and digital video in the classroom. You don't really get stuff like this anymore in classes. A lot of their music has a very ominous tone. It can be really immersive because of that. And their older music used a lot of hip-hop style beats playing over warm tape-stretched synths. Later releases started introducing things like guitars into the mix. Their debut album was called Music Has the Right to Children. It was released in 1998 in the UK by Warp and Scam Records, Matador here in the US. It got a lot of critical acclaim on its release. It's considered one of electronic music's most influential albums of all time. Like you said, Geogaddi was released in 2002, and by some fans, it's considered to be their best album, and I guess you could really say that about any album, right? Fans are going to say, yeah, that's the best one. So that's kind of a bit of a misnomer.
Unless they change a member of the group, then there's always going to be a lot of fans that say it's the worst album ever.
Right. Or maybe they change the style. Maybe like Sugar Ray, right? They start off as being a hardcore band and play ballads after a while. So with this album, they wanted to record a project that had more detail and maybe a little bit more concentrated recipe of little melodies. And they wanted to be a little bit more fuzzy and organic than the previous releases. So I don't like to talk about music generally. So this is, maybe it's a bad way to start a topic of a podcast when you're going to talk about an album. How do you feel about talking about music in general when you're kind of trying to objectively describe it? I guess you can't really describe it objectively, right? It's subjective. Everybody's taste is different.
I like talking about music as long as I know that no one in the conversation is going to get over the top offended or like defensive. Yeah, being upfront with this is a totally different album than the type of thing that I listen to. You know, we've done 2 other music episodes on this, and those 2 albums are 1,000% in my wheelhouse. We did Get That album and a Misfits album, and those are stuff that I've always listened to, that type of stuff. This, for me, was like a whole different experience. If I'm being upfront, I listened to this album 3 times over the last week or so since we talked about doing this episode, including right before we came on, just to kind of refresh myself on it a little bit. Every time that I listened to it, I was like, I probably should have taken some edibles or something before I played this. Like, that might have made this a more, and like, I didn't ever put it on in headphones. Like, that's most of the time, like whatever the album is, like no matter what the type of music is, my preferred way to put it on is to put it on in the car and go drive around somewhere and kind of get more of an experience like that. My speakers aren't like, I don't have some like awesome sound system in my car, but I feel like that's how you get a better sound. You're actually surrounded by it. And just on like a personal level, I'd rather not have like headphones either in my ear or on my ear. Like it just sounds better to me that way. Short of seeing it live. If I can see it live, that's my preferred method. Unfortunately, life happens. I just didn't have the chance to do that with this album, for better or worse. But I did, like I said, get through it 3 times over the last week or so.
Wow, that's commitment. I commend you.
Honestly, if I'm going to talk about an album, I think I owe it to the album to listen to it at least twice. I don't think it's more so than a movie. I think there's more to pick out. I think it's music in general. I think is more of a form of like, obviously it's an artistic form of expression. It almost feels redundant saying that, but I feel like there's a lot more that can be interpreted with that than what you get out of a film or TV show or something. Like, I feel like a movie is going to be a little, not all movies, but most movies are going to be a little more straightforward. You know, if you're making an album about, or if you're making a movie about, I don't know, the government, it's going to have a pretty straightforward plot line that revolves around the government. If you're making an album about, you know, I mean, I heard something on this, that this is supposedly an album about Satan, which I've heard a lot of albums about Satan in my time, and they do not sound like this, but that's not to say it's not about that.
Well, that's
which
not
I'm
to
sure
say
you
that
have notes
it is about
that.
it, though.
Well, and I was going to say, I'm sure you have notes on that point as well, because that came up a couple times on what I was looking at while listening to it and trying to better understand what I was hearing. You know, what I could say about it as far as like what I took out of the album, it's got a very cinematic feel to me.
Yeah.
It almost feels like this. Have you ever listened to a movie score, like separately from the movie?
Occasionally, not very often.
And I don't very often either, but it's got a very like cinematic score feel to it. And a lot of that for me has to do with I shouldn't say there's not any, but there's very few like noticeable breaks between tracks. You have everything kind of flows from one song into the other, or one track into the other. Some of these tracks are short interludes that are about like a minute, maybe 2 minutes long. And some of these are like, 3 to 6 minutes long. And it blends in a way that it's interesting. I found it to be kind of relaxing. Like you said, it's warm. It's got that kind of vintage feel to it. It certainly didn't make me want to like, drive fast and like flip off my dad or anything like a lot of the stuff I listen to does. But
well, can we play some music and we'll talk about it a little bit?
Yeah.
All right. This is going to be a first for us. Went through a big ordeal to get all this set up. So I'm going to just start with the first song and I'll just kind of maybe hit some retorts on you. This is called Ready, Let's Go. This song is 59 seconds, like you said. So there are a lot of these little short interludes and little short ideas. You talked about the Satanism aspect of it. And I feel like that's kind of blown out of proportion. I feel like that's a real part of the fandom talks about that. I don't get any satanic vibes from this album. I can agree that some are brooding, but
I don't get satanic vibes out of it either. But if you're someone and again, I'm putting myself out there with this. I don't know nothing about, like, I know of the band Boards of Canada. When I worked in a record store, we had a few of their albums. I know we had this album. I wasn't really familiar with it, but I knew of it. So if you're looking at it from a outsider's point of view of like, oh, what's this Geogaddi album all about? And the first thing they tell you is like, well, it's a satanic album.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, let's go. You know?
Well, I feel like it has to have words. You know, like an album has to have words for you to be able to determine what the idea is. Like, I can't listen to an album that's mostly instrumentals or, you know, some kind of weaving of different instruments and say, that's an album about God. Like, that just doesn't make sense to me. But
yeah, and I would agree with that.
I think a lot of things, because the song lengths, the amount of songs on the album, like I've read even things where like the size in megabytes of the album, you know, when you encode it in whatever format, equals 666 megabytes. Like, how? What did you encode that in? You know what I mean? So that's,
yeah.
There's things like song track lengths correspond to verses in the Bible, you know, stuff like that. Like, that's too deep for me.
Well, I feel like if you want to go up that road, you could almost pull that out of any album. Like, if you look hard enough, and again, maybe this is like paraphrasing, but say a word like smite, for example, like if that somehow makes its way into an album's lyric or something, like a certain chord or whatever, like, well, clearly that's the note of Lucifer or whatever. You know? I don't know enough about theology to or for that matter, I don't have the time to care that much to dig through any album for that. I only bring it up because it was something that came up several
constantly.
times.
Yeah.
When I was looking at information on this album.
So this song, this kind of leads me into this song is Music is Math. This is I basically what I did looking at this is I took songs that I thought were standouts for me. This was one of those. I like this kind of mechanical beat that this has. It's very technical, almost mechanical. It's led by the beat, and underneath are these, again, kind of warm, fuzzy, warbly synths. You have the heavily vocoded spoken word that at times you can't really, you feel like you can almost make something out, but you can't make out enough to be like, this is what they're saying. This is what the song is about.
There are several tracks where there's audible voices on it. Some of them sound like they're from Creepy Kids or something.
That's a Boards of Canada staple, is the Creepy Kid.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say it almost comes off as like haunting at times with it, and I thought that before I realized that this is supposedly an evil album or whatever. It's certainly not something that, coming from a not knowing about electronic music, it feels like more of a feature or an effect that you would find. Maybe they're the first band to do this, or the first group to do this. I don't know, but it feels like something that's more reoccurring in electronic music in general, is sampling sounds or sampling voices and kind of just doing something to get like a cool beat to it.
One thing about Boards of Canada and the influence that they've had on electronic music is that they are very secretive. Not maybe secretive, but very clandestine. The two brothers don't give a lot of interviews, especially they'll have more written interviews, but they don't give a lot of audio interviews. They did one of the few that you can find is they did a Peel session at BBC, and they talked to John Peel about their album, or they performed some songs or whatnot. And they took this really long break between some of their albums, and they did this whole campaign where they just released these numbers, and the numbers would correspond. It's eventually they would just send an album to a record store, like a random record store, and it would just be marked sell immediately, and it would be a CD,
like a 101 or something.
Yeah, like one track, and it would just play these numbers, and all the fans had to come together and try to figure out these sequence of numbers to figure out what it meant. So they like to do these little kind of almost ARG, altered reality games, where they can kind of play with the fans, the big fandom. And I feel like this album is has a lot of that in it. And one thing that people have said, fans of theirs have said, there's a movie, and I think it's called, I'll link it in the show notes. I think it's called Turquoise Hexagon Sun. I think that's what it's called, but it's like a YouTube video where this guy put this whole thing together, and he goes through Board of Canada's their entire like career from when they started, like from their birth basically, and where they got their name from, how they got the sounds, how they started getting into it. And the person says in this, documentary, basically that there are so many albums that get put out that are fakes. Like people make these albums in the style of Boards of Canada, and then they go on fan sites or whatever forums, and they say, hey, maybe we found this lost Boards of Canada thing or this new album. And I think one of the brothers, I'm not sure if it was Michael or Marcus, said basically in an interview that we want to change our sound. We want to evolve because we don't want someone to put out an album with just creepy kid vocals. Right. And that's what we're known for. So I wanted to move on to the next track that I had, and that would be Gyroscope. And I'll fade that in here. We can get a listen to it.
That's interesting about the fake album thing. And again, coming from a background of listening to stuff with, and I'm sure technology will make this all relevant at some point in the not too distant future, but with signature guitar styles and vocals and all that type of stuff, like, you never would have really thought about a fake, like, I don't know, a fake Beatles album or something. A huge example. But, we're at the point now where it's like, I just read an article last week where whatever this new AI was, said if it had 3 seconds of your voice, it could copy like the entire, whatever language you want out of it. So I guess that's probably not something that's all too far away in the not distant future.
Not to go too far down the rabbit hole on AI, but that's one thing with the Stable Diffusion that I talked about, I don't know, a month or two ago that I was messing around with, that can copy art styles. And there are people that are upset, artists are upset because you can say, make this picture in the style of so-and-so artist, and the AI has been trained on these artists. But again, that's a topic for another time. I wanted to talk about this song, which again is called Gyroscope. The reason this is a standout to me is with that panning of the drums that's kind of like going around, especially if you're wearing headphones, if you're driving in the car. It has a very kind of circular feel. It's got really this creepy 80s like number station vibe to it. Feels really 80s Cold War because of that. You can hear the spoken part of this song are those numbers being read in a sequence that you're like, what does that mean?
I thought this song felt kind of almost like tribal, but not at the same time, because it's got a very electronic sound to it at the same time. But that drum, and I was kind of curious if it's an actual drum that they're hitting or if it's like produced sound,
like a sample
not.
Or something. I'm sure it's probably, it could be either. Honestly, who knows?
But this was one that stuck out to me too, just because that drum sound or drum beat is very, it kind of lodges right in there,
So we'll fade out of this one. I want to start into my next standout that I found. And when I'm done, if you have ones that you have notes on that you want to talk about, I can do the same thing. But this one is...
Oh, I had the 2.
Okay.
But we'll get to those.
This is the 6th track on the album. It's called Sunshine Recorder, and that's here. This one might be more, oh, beautiful place. Because that's the repeating lyric that keeps coming up in this song that I'm sure we'll get into. But this one, for me, again, music is it's the way it makes you feel, right? It's going to be different from person to person. But this one, with that attacking and releasing of the notes, kind of fades in and fades out, all the different notes. It gives a back and forth, like a give and take, an ebb and a flow. The music I'm into, electronic music especially, is really music to kind of chill out to, or something that's really can be ambient or like more of a vibe. I'm not big into, this is considered EDM, which is like electronic dance music. That's just like a generic
There's nothing
term.
about this that makes me want to dance.
No, well, but I mean, you can't. It's not jungle. It's not house music. Maybe
it's not trance or whatever.
Yeah, maybe down tempo.
I mean, this does have this album as a whole, like not just this song, but the majority of this album has like it would feel right at home in like a coffee shop or like a cigar bar or something like that, where it's on and you can audibly hear it, but it's not doing anything that's gonna, for the most part, that's gonna affect the conversation or the mood or the vibe. It is very much so. To me, it came off like mood music almost.
Yeah, I can see that. I feel like you made the comment before about driving, listening to this while driving. I think this is one of my favorite albums to drive to. I think it just has a really great kind of vibe for driving in the dark, in this kind of weather, in the kind of winter, kind of dreary months. I picked up this album in 2002, so it's a big nostalgia album for me too. I remember buying it, drove out to, I don't know if you ever went to Neptune Records in Royal Oak. It was more of like an indie rock kind of record store, but I think it was in the first location on Main Street. I just remember putting this CD, CD in my car on a rainy day, February 13th or whatever. It was a little underwhelming at first because I was so used to their first album, and then coming into this one, it was like, whoa, this is a major difference. Like, not so much of the hip hop kind of beat, more of this, like you said, tribal, some of it mechanical, just different, playing with the drums in different ways. And the thing with Boards of Canada's music, I feel, more than other types of electronic music, the drum doesn't change much. Like, you get that same pattern.
No. And that actually led to what I was saying, where a lot of this album, the tracks kind of bleed from one to the other.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of albums in any genre where there's not like a break between tracks where one song will just kind of flow into the other. But that drum beat that's similar throughout the whole album from start to finish is what makes it feel like, and again, as a novice at best, I found myself going and looking like, where the fuck am I in this album? Like, what track am I on? Like, where? Not so much like the album equivalent of a watch check, but like, you kind of get absorbed into it. Like, you lose track of like what's going on, how long you've been listening to this. Like, it just kind of it's more of an experience than it is a, like, I don't maybe you do because you're more of a fan of this, but I don't know that you could just pick like one track to put on. Like, oh, I really need to hear Toxic because I'm in a mood or something. Are
you talking about Britney Spears Toxic?
Yeah.
Okay. I need that sass.
Whatever. Like, there's not. This doesn't feel like something you would put on to like play one track. Like, it feels like once you put this album on, you're in it for the duration. Like, I don't know that you could put just one song on and be like, all right, now I'm gonna play The Sign or something.
Back in Black. That's
whatever.
I have a counterpoint to that, and that's the next song I'm gonna play. But this one I wanted to talk about. This is Julian Candy. This music, this song has a lot of whistles. That's what most of the instrument you're hearing, the higher kind of pitched, are these different whistles that play back and forth, obviously pitched up and down and shredded out and stretched and warbled and, buzzed and wobbled and all that stuff. This one has a lot of that back and forth, like I said, that rhythmic beat playing on top of it. The drum sound, the pattern doesn't change much, but it's the background stuff that kind of evolves and changes, but it just evolves so organically. It's really just kind of, it blows my mind when you listen to something like this, and I get off on stuff like this. Maybe get off is the wrong term to use, but I enjoy it.
Need to get you a rag?
So I want to play this sample for you real quick, and you tell me if you heard this in a song. Let's see if I can get it just with
a song other than the song you're going to play, you mean?
It's going to be in the next one.
I'm confused. What else is new? John's confused.
Oh, you don't hear it. It's not coming through. Well, that's That's a shame. But I'm going to play the next song. And this, hey, we're full of surprises on this podcast. This next song is my favorite Boards of Canada song. It appears on this album. This is the one song on this album, because some of their albums are a little bit different. There are some of those standout songs, and they don't always melt together. Some of them kind of they're tracks on their own. This song, I feel like it's one of those songs. This is a song, Boards of Canada song. I can just put this song on and I get my fix. I don't have to listen to the whole album to get the full experience. And I feel like a lot of the album starts to, I don't know. So sometimes I can listen to this next song I'm about to play, and this is the last, like, I don't have to listen to the rest of the album. I feel like I don't have any standouts actually after this song, and it's almost right in the middle. So I'm going to start this one up, and I'm going to start it and let it go without fading it up. So let's start it kind of up, and here we go.
Oh yeah, I remember hearing this one.
This to me has just that vibe. It's got just a harshness to it. I don't know if it's the beat or the bass when it comes in, like the really heavy bass and the kick that come in. It just has this, like, I don't know, for as badassness as Boards of Canada can get, I feel like this is like the embodiment of that. And I would call this the most quote unquote satanic, if we're going to talk about satanic on the album, with the mentioning of the Branch Davidians, the sample that plays in here.
What?
Which
there's a mention of the Branch Davidians.
That's what I was trying to play the sample for. So we'll wait till it gets there. But this lyric, it took me forever to decode what they were actually saying. And they actually sample the wife of David Koresh's rival, the former wife of his rival, I guess, in the Branch Davidians. And here, I think this is where the lyric comes in. And I'll tell you what it's saying after. We'll let it play the next time around, and then I'll tell you what it says.
See, I just thought it was weird, like, I didn't necessarily go to, like, Satanism, but I just thought it was weird, like, gibberish, for lack of better wording.
Yeah, so let me pause it. And the lyric, or the thing that's sampled is, and it's kind of hard to decode, because if you're just listening to it straight up, you won't hear the David Koresh part. But what the lyric says is, although not a follower of, and it says David Koresh, but David is backwards and Koresh is backwards, so you can't make it out. It says, although not a follower of David Koresh, she's a devoted Branch Davidian. So I'll play it again.
This is deep.
Oh, we gotta wait for it to come around. Most imperfect place to pause.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. We gotta go through the 8 bars or whatever. Okay, check it out. Although not a follower of David Koresh, she's a devoted Branch Davidian. All right, I'll let you hear it again.
All right. I mean, so I'm not doubting you. I'm sure, like, because this is your thing, I'm sure you took the time to, know what it's about.
I did the research.
But is this kind of like one of those things where...
You play it backwards.
This almost feels like one of the... No. Is this almost one of those things like, well, you put the idea in my head, so now I'm kind of thinking that way, so maybe it does sound like that? I mean...
I have heard this album so many times, and I didn't know what it said. And if you actually... I don't know if... You listen to music on Spotify, right?
Yeah.
I listen to music on Apple Music, and I don't know if Spotify shows the lyrics.
It does on most... Not everything, but some things.
But on Apple Music, it has lyrics for the song. And I had listened to it on CD forever, right? For the past 20 years. And I never once thought, oh, there are lyrics for the song, but there are. And if you look at the lyrics on Apple Music, those are the exact lyrics, and it has David Koresh.
Huh.
I think there's actually a part where David Koresh is not backwards in this song. But the other part, this song is 1969, if I didn't mention it. And they say 1969 in the Sunshine, but there's another sample that's clearly heard, and that is Amo Bishop Roden, who is the former wife of David Koresh's rival in the Branch Davidians. I just thought that was wild. I have heard this song hundreds of times, and I feel like this is like the showstopper for this album. Like there's still, I don't know, 13, 14 more tracks to go on this, but these were the ones I wanted to highlight.
Now you got me thinking about David Koresh.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So they were, I guess when they recorded this album, they were really influenced by the events in Waco. So that's where, they start talking about some of this stuff. That's actually the end of the song. But, and I faded out right at the right point. Give myself some audio engineering kudos. But you're
a fucking pro.
Thank you very much. I try very hard. So you said that you had a couple songs that you wanted to kind of highlight that you took notes on, or that stood out to you.
Yeah, I only had like 2 songs that I really said stood out to me, or really thought stood out to me. It's they're kind of like right next to each other, essentially, in the track listing. The song that I kind of liked the most out of this was "You Could Feel the Sky," which was track 21. It's got a similar sound to the bongo or drum beat that you were playing earlier, but it sounds more sticky. Somehow it sounds almost like a Velcro peeling type sound. Yeah, there you go. For whatever reason, when this came on, it might be because it came right after a song that I did not like. I thought it was kind of cool, and it kind of stuck out a little bit, and it's the one that each time that I went through this album, all 3 of them, this song kind of stuck out as one that sounded cool. I don't have any like deep insight on it or anything like that. Just kind of, it stuck out to me because it had a little bit of a different sound coming out of the speakers. And I guess it was a nice reprise after what had preceded it. I don't know if you have any insight on this one or not.
Yeah, no, I do like this track a lot. It's like you said, this is like a really low-key song. It has that kind of, I don't know, synth or organ or something in the background that just walks through the entire track, that just evolves with that, like you said, like Velcro or sticky or like a rubber band, like a balloon or something stretching back and forth, rubbing your hands over some rubber hose or something.
So one of the things I've always kind of gravitated to in music is music that kind of makes you feel a little dirty. Like, I like the Misfits, and I like Motorhead, and those guys all look like they haven't showered since like the day they got shed out of the womb.
They look like they all have hepatitis, for sure.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
That's the worst of their problem. Least of their problems. All right.
And in comparison to the rest of this album, I guess this kind of has like a little bit of a grimy feel to it, which maybe that's what appealed to me with it. Again, in contrast to that, the one that this song I did not, this is the only song that I really would say that I actively disliked on the album. And I'm not alone on this because I have 2 dogs in my house, and both of them started crying and looking at me like, what the fuck is wrong with you? When I was playing this. And they're used to hearing a lot of different stuff, but they were both pretty upset with this. It's track number 19, which is Dawn Chorus, and there's I guess it's another creepy kid. But there's a very like repetitive, obnoxious vocal harmony in this that I could do without ever hearing it again.
I'm
sorry. We're gonna play it now, but no,
I'm not sorry.
You shouldn't be sorry. And maybe I'm wrong on this one. But, again, it's all opinion. I'm not saying anything to be like being an asshole or anything, but this one for me was the one track that I could care less for. That's the other thing too, like the chord sound in it, and I'm not sure, again, I'm sure it's just a synth or a keyboard or something like that, but it's a very bleeding sound, but not in a way that I enjoy. It just feels very like, No.
We'll spare you. Oh, there it is right there.
Yeah, there it is. And again,
You love it.
well, like I said, I'm not going to shit on it. It just, or any more than I already have, I guess. But for me, this was the hardest track for me to get through. And this is the one that, if I listened to this album 3 times, I probably started this track 6 times and had to like skip over it and go back to it to actually get through the whole thing.
Okay, let's see if I can play you that Branch Davidian sample.
Back to that. It's been a while since we've done an album. Do we do hot dogs on albums, or do we just kind of? I don't even remember.
I think we do I think we do hot dogs. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's play this sample real quick, and we'll see. This is the although not a follower of David Koresh, she's a devoted Branch Davidian. Here you go.
Yeah, you can definitely hear it there, especially if you know what you're looking for.
And then there's other stuff, but I wanted to thank, before we get into hot dogs, a lot of the research that I did on this, obviously, besides listening to it my own, was there's a lot pulled from Wikipedia for both about Geogaddi, Music Has the Right to Children, Michael Sandison and Marcus Eoin, and the other site that I found invaluable was bocpages.org. That is the page to look at if you want like hardcore deep analysis on any kind of Boards of Canada music song. They have individual samples and lyrics and trivia and notes about all the music on all of their albums. Hopefully this podcast that we put together was something that maybe will lead you into listening to more Boards of Canada and enjoying yourself. So without further ado, John, let's hear your hot dog rating on this one.
All right, so I'm actually going to do this as 2 separate ratings, because I think it's the most fair way I can do it. Objectively looking at this as an album just on its own merit, taking my personal opinion out of it, I'd say this is probably like a solid 7 hot dogs out of 10 Canadians. You know, I don't have enough experience to really compare it with electronic music in general to compare it to anything else in the genre, or at least not to effectively compare it. But I could say, being someone who, like, being new to it, I wasn't mad that I was listening to it at any point. I wasn't, like, frustrated with it. I found it to be a different experience altogether, which is a good thing. And you know, you got to try different shit. You never know what you're going to get into if you don't try it, right? On that side, I like, and I do dig that it's got this, again, cinematic, almost score type feel to it. When I found out it might be satanic, that gave some extra points to it, for better or worse. It's just where the conflict of interest would come for me is on a personal side with it, like my own opinion. If I were giving it like a hot dog scale just on like, take objective out of it, just my own personal thoughts on it, I'd probably put it just like about a 5 hot dogs out of, 10 Scots. And that's more so just because it's good and it's a solid album. It's just not my thing. And realistically, although I don't have anything really negative to say about it, I can't honestly say I'm going to find myself going back to this on a regular basis.
Did you listen to this around your wife?
No.
Okay.
No, I did
was
not.
Curious to see if she
I
had
did
an
tell her
opinion.
I was listening to it, and she said, "What the fuck's the Boards of Canada?"
All right, well, good. Just what we like to hear.
She also looked at me very confused, like, "You're listening to a what?" An electronic album. You're listening to an electronic album?
Are you feeling okay? Did she feel your forehead? No, you feel okay.
She asked if I needed to go to the hospital.
Well, maybe you did. I don't know.
But again, I want to reiterate, I don't mean that to sound like I'm talking shit about the style of music or anything like that. I'm just saying from a personal standpoint, it's not my thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's bad or good or anything like that. It's just, it's not for me.
Yeah, and that's, some people like hot dogs, some people like hamburgers. Some people like both, and some people don't like either.
And some people are wrong, and they're typically named John.
Well, I'm glad you can admit to it. So for me, this album, I would give this a solid 8.5 to 9 hot dogs out of 11 Branch Davidians. Boards of Canada is a group that I, at one point, really, really enjoyed when I have gone about making or attempting to make music, they've always been a major influence on stuff. Not that I want to make stuff that sounds like what they do, but I always had that idea of, how did they do that? How did they get that sound? Where is that sample from? What am I hearing? It takes me back. It gives me this nostalgic kind of feeling, like I said, to elementary film strips and the warbly, like distorted film strips that you would watch in class, turn the lights down, have the teacher break the reel on the cam, on the film player, whatever, projector. There we go. It just has that feel to me. And it reminds me a lot of the Film Board of Canada, where they got the name of their group. So, I go back and I'll actually watch some of their stuff. National Film Board of Canada, I'll watch some of their videos on YouTube, because you can still watch a lot of these really quirky animations or movies that they were commissioned by them. But yeah, I mean, I listened to Boards of Canada a lot at a point of time in my life when, it was really influential on me growing up. I was probably in my 20s or whatever, and living a little bit more of a wild life than I do in my 40s now. But as time goes on, you move on, right? You move on to different things. But this album, and especially the songs that I highlighted, and especially PPS 1969 being my favorite Boards of Canada song, that is one, when I want to get my fix of Boards of Canada, I just go back to that. And on some of their later releases, especially their last album, Tomorrow's Harvest, I didn't really listen to it much, because I was kind of moved on from Boards of Canada, and I was kind of out of that pocket. Sometimes you get in a pocket of music and you find things that are similar. Tomorrow's Harvest, that time frame when that album came out, was kind of, I was out of the pocket. But Boards of Canada has had a major influence on electronic music. You can think of bands or groups like Tycho. You can think of bands or groups like Bonobo. You can think Amon Tobin, and even contemporaries took a lot of inspiration, and maybe not direct sounds, and these artists don't directly lift off Boards of Canada, but you can tell that the way that Boards of Canada, just the fabric, the texture of the music that they put together, had influence on a lot of different electronic music. I feel like a lot of contemporary artists now, still, you can feel some of the vibes that Boards of Canada put out. So not a perfect album. Like I said, I kind of fall off. 1969 is like the peak for me, and then the rest of it's kind of like going down the mountain. That's kind of where I stopped. So that's the album. I have obviously listened to the songs after that, but yeah, that's this is one of my favorite albums. And to give it an 8.5, I think it's just 8.5 to 9. I think that's just kind of like, you move on a little bit from it. But I'm glad, and I'm thankful that you had an open mind to listen to this, because we talked about the album, like, let's do an album. We'll talk about an album next. And I always get so anxious, or so, I don't know, not nervous, but like, I don't want to talk about music, because it can be so subjective. It's a personal thing. The headspace you're in when you listen to it, or, how you're feeling at the time, can really influence your opinion on something. And this album did take a long time to grow on me. So I appreciate that you had an open mind to listen to it. And you listened to it 3 times. Like I said, I'm genuinely pretty impressed that you put the work in to listen to it 3 times.
Music's such a different thing too. Like, people identify themselves with music so much. I'm guilty of that too. Like, I, for better or worse, hate to admit, but like, my political views, my personality, and my belief system, a lot of that is based off the music and the group of people and the culture that I grew up in. And I'm sure that's the same for you. And I can't speak to that from another person's angle, but doesn't make it right or wrong. I'm not going to, the least I can do is at least give it a chance, right?
Sure.
So,
yep.
On a side note, you rambled off like 6 or 7 other artists, and I have no idea who any of them were.
That was the
so
point, John.
Oh, that's good. Well, I don't know what we're going to talk about next. Did you like this episode, though? I hope you listened to it all, and we would really like some feedback on this one, especially whenever we go outside the box and kind of out. We can talk about horror movies and shitty action movies all day, but going outside of our comfort zone is kind of fun to do, and I don't know. I enjoy doing something different, so give us some feedback. Tell us what you want us to talk about next. Maybe you want us to talk about a TV show. Maybe it's a Tchaikovsky record. I don't know. Let us know.
He's a classical artist or a composer, right?
He's a classical. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That would be off the rails, but hey, whatever. We've already done one fan request episode. We got another one coming up soon. So if you want us to talk about something, we're willing to either give it an open mind, or in the case of last week's episode, suffer through it, whatever we got to do. Let us know. Follow us on all the stuff. We're at Dewey Pod Monster, wherever you can find us. Leave us feedback, like I said, subscribe, share it. That would be awesome. And then listen to Sean, because he's got way cooler shit to talk about than what I do.
That's big shoes to fill, John. You can find
I'm involved with half your shit, so
that's true.
Go ahead.
You can find me at drafttherapy.com. You can follow my YouTube channel at youtube.drafttherapy.com. I talk about beer. Right now, it's January, currently, and I'm in the middle of my cellar dive, digging through all my beer in my cellar, not all of it, some of the beer in my cellar, to see if it's still good, or maybe it's just meh. So you can follow me, youtube.drafttherapy.com, or on any of the social networks that you participate or follow in at Draft Therapy.
I think that's all we got this week. Again, let us know what you want us to talk about next, and we will be back next Tuesday morning with some new shit or good stuff. We'll see. Have a good week.